Hey, it's Fletch. I'm the founding principal of Fletch 911 Consulting. Today we're going to be wrapping up our 5-part series on ASAP, the Digital Alarm Monitoring Protocol. Let's get started.
Hi, it's Spider Harrison, your official 911 voiceover dude. I'm not sure what that means, but I am official. With today's episode of our special TiPS series on alarm processing and the ASAP Digital Alarm Protocol. In this final episode of our special series, Fletch sits down with alarm industry visionary expert Morgan Hertel. Morgan is the Vice President of Technology and Innovation at Rapid Response Monitoring and an inductee into the SSI Hall of Fame in 2023. Now, here's Fletch. He's official too.
Okay, let's start with a simple scenario. It's 2:13 in the morning, and a burglary alarm is triggered at a commercial facility. A monitoring center operator sees the signal and within seconds is making decisions that affect a police response. Now, for decades, that has basically looked the same from a process perspective. Basic alarm signals, phone calls into 911, and limited information reaching the police dispatcher. But now we're hearing about ASAP and digital alarm intelligence that's able to arrive at the ECC with context, validation, and richer data. So to help us understand what this situation looks like from inside the monitoring center, I'm joined by industry expert Morgan Hertel, an industry leader from the Rapid Response Monitoring Center, who's directly helping with how centers today connect with ECCs. Thanks so much for being with us here today. So Morgan, let's rewind a little bit here for history's sake. For the people that are outside of the industry, who probably assume that the monitoring centers have always been digitally connected to the ECCs, that actually hasn't been the case. So describe for me, if you will, a little bit of history on what this looked like before ASAP and what that workflow looked like inside the monitoring center.
Let's go back all the way to the 70s and 60s. You had police boards in the police departments, and systems were connected directly into those. Every alarm was an alarm in the PSAP. And in the late 70s, early 80s, the police departments were really getting overrun between direct connects, inverse polarity stuff. Back then, they called them tape dialers. And the tape dialers would then overrun. Storm would roll through, and a police department's phone lines would get jammed up. There was absolutely zero vetting of any kind of alarm condition then. Through ordinance, most police departments decided that they didn't want to be in that business anymore. They couldn't properly keep up with it. They couldn't staff for it. And they didn't have the time to vet all those alarms. And they didn't have the boots on the ground to even respond to those. So everything got pushed out into monitoring centers. That was a real change in how things were done. And even in the late 70s, early 80s, monitoring centers that were out there still would call in by a phone. They did no vetting. That started to change in the late 80s, 90s, where ordinances for false alarms were starting to pop up. But more importantly, the industry started to really look at it and start to self-regulate and come up with ways to cut those numbers down. I refer to those numbers today as clearance rates. So how many alarms come into a monitoring center? Does a monitoring center clear and they never end up in public safety? Back then, it started out, right, every alarm was dispatched. There was no clearance rate. Up to today, where many centers, Rapid included, we are clearing 97.3% of all alarms that come in, intrusion alarms that come into the monitoring center, never make it to public safety. So when we look at workflow and what does that look like in a day in a life at an alarm center for us, is that the majority of our time starts out with trying to make sure that it's real. And 97.3% of the time, we determine that it's not. But if it does get to that, in the non-ASAP to PSAP connected alarms, it's a manual phone call. And we have to manually give them the information, we have to give them the address, and whatever additional information that they need. Might be permit number information, might be, in case we have to call them back, cross streets, special notes, zone locations. All that exchange typically takes a couple of minutes to make happen. And every alarm that occurs, rapid averages about 2.5 calls per alarm event. So not only is it the initial dispatch, but the PSAP will have to call us back and say, hey, we need a key holder, or we need this, or we need that. And then we'll call them back and say, okay, they're on their way, their ETA is, they're driving this, and here's who's coming. And so there's this back and forth that happens. And total time involved is roughly 6-7 minutes on every dispatch. And we ship it electronically, and it gets there in seconds. And so this 6-7 minutes, we drop into 30-40 seconds worth of work as we start to transition from calling on alarms to doing that digitally.
It's really interesting because talking from a perspective of someone who used to sit at one of those old hardwired alarm boards at a 911 center, it was kind of just the old technology that sat on the wall that made noise. So what kind of new information are monitoring centers able to provide to the modern ECC that they never had before or had a way to convey to the ECC?
Yeah, either didn't receive because they didn't ask for it, or it was inconsistently delivered. So you get all the site-specific notes about things, gate codes, Knox box codes, any kind of information about the site that we have all goes electronically, including cross streets, even lat long. Most of our events that we send also come with lat long. So if you have mapping applications, you get rooftop coordinates right there to do whatever you need to do with it at the PSAP. But now we're also starting to manage other bits of information. So things like video or audio, if that's associated with it. Video is a big deal, and many ECCs today want video. Some don't, but many do. And so how do we manage actionable video, not just video for the sake of video, is going. But we're also, the biggest one is speed and accuracy. Nobody makes transcription mistakes, gets a number backwards, or whether they say it backwards or hear it backwards. None of that happens anymore. And those are huge, huge time savers for both sides, being able to send all that kind of data and send it accurately and repeatedly and quickly. I can send in a cancel if I end up talking to a subscriber that calls me back in a couple of seconds. Before, I would have to call in and go through the whole process. And if it's got one of those automated front ends, then I have to go through the whole automated front end process. Meanwhile, we have officers and first responders responding to something that we're desperately trying to cancel and can't. It's not just additional information, it's accuracy and speed of that same information.
So let's talk a little bit about the people side of the equation. The operators are handling all of this new information and handling these alarms in real time. Not only are they under intense pressure, but they've got to capture all this additional information as well as the alarm validation information under new standards and protocols that are out there, like the AVS-01 ANSI standard. How do you train your people to gather all this information, put it together, and do that without slowing down the process?
Most of it is done through automation. Every alarm company, every monitoring center that's out there has some form of automation. I'd be amazed to find anybody that's left that's still working off of manual systems today. So a lot of this data is gathered and amassed and prepared and then shipped in the background, whether it's specific information that lives in a data file, something that could be generated based on AI, or something that an operator saw and simply clicked a box to flag it and say, ship this to an ECC or a subscriber. Most of that stuff is being handled. Even AVS-01, which is the scoring model, that is scoring based on things that are occurring within that alarm event. So as an example, if you get an alarm and you've got video or audio or talking to the neighbor who's looking out their window and we see people, as soon as we log that we see people, then that bumps it right up to level 2. And then if the neighbor sees and we document that they're taking stuff out of the building, or they have a sledgehammer in their hand or a shovel, whatever it happens to be, and it looks like a crime is being processed, just part of that bumps that to a level 3. And so those statuses, those levels are being shipped automatically as part of that process. And if it's one of the old call-ins, then it's part of the script that's pre-formatted to give to an operator to say it's also a level 3. And we have a very specific script that our industry uses so that every PSAP gets told the same exact way over and over again.
So let's talk about something that you've mentioned a couple of times already that most people will agree is one of the biggest problems today, and that's false alarms. I think that ASAP offers an opportunity to start tackling that problem upstream. So what are the alarm centers doing to help with that issue?
If you look at the way Rapid and most of the majors, ADT and others, that quest to reduce false alarms is really on the top of everybody's list. And it's on the list because truly the alarm industry believes that it has to preserve public safety resources. It's a limited resource. It doesn't have the ability to just willy-nilly respond to everything. And so there's most of the leaders that you talk to in these big companies, that is really number one on their radar. And the way you get there is through a multitude of things. One of them is to leverage technology. And you mentioned tracking alarms. So doing things like understanding what your clearance rates are and trying to improve that over and over again. And part of that process changes you to changing how you process things and how you use technology. So I'll give you a really simple application. When you look at phone calls today, phone calls when we call people are only answered about 22 to 24% of the time, depending on the organization. So it's 20+% effective. Nobody would do anything that's only 20% effective. So calling doesn't work like it used to back in the 70s and 80s when everybody answered their phones. Today, nobody answers their phones and they all got cell phones. So you have to do things like sending text messages, but now you got to send text messages and you have to do that with video. You have to send the video or the audio clip so that the consumer can hear it and understand it, or say, hey, that's not my kids, that's not the cleaner, that's somebody that's not supposed to be there. And a lot of this technology is all part of developing ways to manage the ASAP connections, manage what we send and how we send. The standard for ASAP was done 15 years ago. I've been part of that group and I'm still part of that group since day one. And the amount of information that we are now able to send forces us to now collect it in order to be able to send it. But now we can use that same information to manage false alarms much more effectively, to get service people out when it's necessary and to understand the difference between a real alarm and a false alarm. So it's been kind of this overhaul of technology in the last 15 years that has really made huge strides. And to get to a 97% rate is not easy.
Okay, next I want to take it all the way over from the left, all the way over to the right, from false alarm information to richer data. Do you have any examples where this richer information that you have has made a difference in a response?
Oh, sure. Thousands. I mean, being able to understand what's really happening. We've been monitoring Sonatrol 35 years. And Sonatrol, for those that don't know, is an audio-based application that is looking for human voices, sounds of break-ins, breaking glass, those kinds of things. And the apprehension rate on those is dramatically higher than anything else. And it's not because of necessarily the technology itself. Audio's been around for decades, right? But it's how you leverage it. Now today we're taking that same audio when we're running it against AI filters that are looking at that audio and saying, hey, wait a minute, I've heard that same sound 15 times before. We know that's a train whistle. Let's go ahead and clear that. And so you're starting to see a lot of that kind of stuff. Video is huge. Location is huge. All those things matter. Rich data, you talked about a problem that we had a number of years ago, and it's kind of dramatic when you start to think about it, is we had an individual that had a movable, portable type system that he could keep on his body. And normally you would talk to that person and say, hey, where are you? This guy was actually on a sinking boat. He could barely talk. It was in the Atlantic Ocean. It was incredibly cold, and they were 8 miles off coast. And it worked, and we were able to get the Coast Guard there. Those are all because of rich data that we could have never had 15 years ago.
Great, so let's finish up by completing this sentence. 2 years from now, an alarm system or an alarm without blank will feel incomplete to an ECC.
Relevant data is the word that I would use, and I think that's an important part, is that we have to get ECCs to relevant data.
Well, that wraps up today's episode of TiPS, Today in Public Safety, and the last in our series on digital alarm processing and the ASAP protocol. My special guest today was alarm industry expert Morgan Hertel with the Rapid Response Alarm Monitoring Center and an industry leader in protocols and standards development. This is Fletch. Remember to follow me on social media at Fletch911. Check out all my TiPS episodes, published every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 911tips.com. You can read all my blogs at fletch.tv, and my professional site is fletch911.com. Thanks for hanging out with me today, and if you're in public safety, thanks for what you do every single day. Stay safe and take care. We'll catch you next time.
You've been listening to TiPS, Today in Public Safety, your go-to podcast for today's breaking stories and public safety news. Hosted by Fletch and available every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Catch past episodes on 911tips.com. Be sure to like and subscribe, and remember to join us each week for the latest on NG 911. I am Spider Harrison, the official 911 voiceover dude. Catch me on Sirius XM on various channels, including 90s on 9, the 10 spot, and on the Weekend Countdown on Hits 1. Or don't regret it for the rest of your life. Either way, I'm good.